On my 7th birthday, I invited every kid I knew to the local McDonald's play place. While they thought they were simply being invited to a party, I had something else in mind. That year, I told my mom to tell all the other parents there was exactly one thing I wanted: cash. So ensued a series of cheap burgers, minor injuries from the playground, and only a bit of struggle retrieving scared kids who became lost in the maze of tubes. Finally, it was time for cake and gifts. The gifts were just cards with $10 to $20 each in them. Once I had gathered and counted my bounty, my mother and I called guardians, and the kids went off one after another. Soon only my mom and 2 kids remained, myself and my best friend. The 3 of us had one destination before returning home: GameStop at the mall. With a pocket full of cash, I passed by the marked down Xbox 360s and PS3s. There was a different console calling my name. In the locked glass display of used handheld devices among the dusty PSPs and Game Boy Advances laid a bright, red-shelled Nintendo DS. Calling to the employee who had the key, I held my hand out to receive the system that would consume thousands of hours of my life. Moving on to the shelf of games for the then young console, on top of the copies of Digimon World and Bratz Forever Diamonds were 2 games that incorporated both of these names but were worth far more to me than those possibly ever could be: Diamond and Pearl. Since first getting a secondhand Game Boy Color and copy of Pokemon Yellow, I had dreamed of this day. No longer would I be playing my favorite franchise through eBay bids and flea market buys. I would enter Sinnoh smelling plastic covers and feeling the click of delicate cases. While that was certainly exciting, the emotions evoked by Sinnoh made it insignificant by comparison. As I dived into my 4th Pokemon world, I would find one that was much different than any I'd seen before. Kanto was a wild land with interspace towns. Johto invoked tradition, and Hoenn certainly brought the drama. Sinnoh would assemble these pieces and finish them with a shellac of mystery and strong themes. The bond between trainer and Pokemon was put forward in a way it never has been before or since. The way the region relies on Pokemon for everything from power to entertainment makes it evident that Pokemon are interlaced with the daily life of every inhabitant. Sinnoh is the oldest land in Pokemon, and it shows. Legends and history are spread throughout the region. Floroma went from barren wastes to flowery fields overnight. Celestia and Solaceon are laden with ancient ruins, and atop the world itself lies the beginning of old life. Searching out these mysteries and enjoying some of the fantastic side activities meant that even though I worked full-time for the better part of 5 years, I still poured more hours into Diamond, Pearl, and Platinum than I have laboring for someone else's profits. 15 years after that party and thousands of hours of digital adventures later, I would find myself showing up to the local Best Buy as soon as they opened to pick up a copy of a Gen 8 game that brought me back to my favorite Pokemon world. Going into this game, I intentionally avoided any kind of spoilers or gameplay outside of the official trailers released by Nintendo. There were bits and pieces I wanted to figure out myself. How faithful would the remakes be to the originals? What quality of life would be included from newer games? Was Cynthia going to be the challenge I remembered her as? And most of all, is this game a nostalgia cash grab or a loving tribute? If I haven't already made it extraordinarily clear, this game is nostalgic for me. Diamond, Pearl, and Platinum are extremely important landmarks in the Pokemon series. No matter how you cut it, Ruby and Sapphire were a major dip in popularity for the games. The Pokemania of the 90s had passed, and while too much water has been memed to death, Gen 3 didn't introduce anything more than a handful of Pokemon and weather mechanics. It was obvious that Game Freak needed to find a new direction for the series or move on to something new. In this way, the DS was an absolute lifesaver. Introducing a new handheld that was more than just an iteration on the Game Boy was a huge move in the right direction for the future of Nintendo. I remember the DS as an absolute must-have at the time of its release, and only being outsold by the PS2 in all-time sales for a console reflects that. Even more so when you consider the DS had a lifespan 3/4 that of the PS2. So imagine you're a developer at Game Freak. You have the hottest console in the world to develop for, and the next sequel to one of the most successful IPs in the world as your project. You can't drop the ball here. And once upon a time, Game Freak used to actually pull through on challenges like this. Before the release of Sword and Shield, Diamond and Pearl were only outsold by Red, Green, Blue, and Gold and Silver. That put it only behind New Super Mario Bros., Nintendogs, Mario Kart DS, and Brain Age as the 5th best-selling DS games of all time. Putting it shortly, these games were certified bangers. Let's start with the mechanics. I cannot play a Pokemon game anymore previous to Gen 4 for one reason only: the physical special split. I know every Pokemon game is someone's first, and numbers-wise it's very likely that Gen 4 was yours. This was the single most important mechanic update in Pokemon history. For the uninitiated, this is what it did. Before Generation 4, physical and special damage was based on typing and typing alone. It worked like this: if Eevee could evolve into that type, or it was a dragon type, then it was special. Everything else was physical. You might be thinking of problems already. Does that mean Bite was a special move? What about Pokemon with high attack stats that were fire or water type? The answer is yes, and you simply could not use them. Was your favorite Pokemon the adorable fire cat dog thing, Flareon? Well, I hope you like sucking, because its base 130 attack could never be applied to a move of its type. Well fine, you just want to use physical moves. That's fine, except through level up, it will never learn a physical move with a base power of more than 40. Flareon is maybe the best example of this, but there were many Pokemon that were hindered greatly without the split. The physical special split changed damage type to have each move in the game be determined as one or the other based on the effects of the move rather than just the type. This means no longer would you have to wait till level 41 for your Noctowl to know any moves that were useful, or have your Flareon blow rings of smoke at your opponent rather than the blaze of fire it's meant to. Now that almost any Pokemon can be usable, sorry Unknown, not you, let's talk about those Pokemon. Sinnoh has a lot of my favorite Pokemon, and there's a good chance that's true for you as well. TrueGreen7 did a comprehensive poll on starter Pokemon favoritism and found that Gen 4 has the second most popular starters, only behind Gen 3. Starly, a Pokemon you can catch less than 20 minutes into the game, is one of the most popular regional bird Pokemon and an absolute cannon stat-wise. Before you reach the first gym, you can find Shinx, my favorite Pokemon, and the Lord and Savior himself, Bidoof. In any new game, the Pokemon need to be a highlight. Sinnoh gives you a wonderful assortment of brand new Pokemon to work with. Without using any team members from previous generations, it's easy to build a party of 6 unique Pokemon that are all brand new. Let me stop right here to obligate my requirement to mention a lack of fire types. The feeling of this being an old world full of legends is represented in the decks. The Lynx, which Shinx is based off of, is an animal that brings up feelings of mystery. Abomasnow is the Snow Yeti of legend. The fossils are Ram and Shield, old world weapons of war. The dex also has particular interest in bringing new evolutions on old Pokemon. This gave new life to several previous generation mons. Magneton can now become Magnezone, introducing a powerful special attacker at the Steel type, with those sets now being viable. Roselia can evolve into Roserade, who's a surprisingly specially bulky Pokemon that can take hits from a lot of its counters. Bonsly is a lovable friend-shaped teammate who I struggle to evolve every time I use it. On top of this, besides the gift legendary Manaphy, every legend in this game has a quest to find it or backstory as to its existence. The Lake Guardians and Box Legendary are the goals to capture for the evil team. Heatran will require you to become the master of the postgame. Cresselia is a healing spirit that you will track down to help a small boy, then chase around the region in hopes of finding. Darkrai is the Pokemon who cursed that small boy. You'll find Professor Oak investigating Shaman when it's time to catch them. Giratina is a whole story in itself with enough lore for an extra hour of content in Platinum. That lore will be delivered to you by cast memorable characters who you will team up with in battle throughout the game. Your gutsy next door neighbor Barry, or for the more creative of you, Assface, was a fresh breath at the time of its release. His energy is high and he's excited about every challenge. While getting his face pushed in the dirt repeatedly by both yourself and the antagonists of the game, Barry will keep his head up and use defeat as a reason to fight harder. This was a welcome change from the previous opponents who tended to talk down to you or be an empty shell that appeared from time to time. At the beginning of the game, Barry will force you into a confrontation with Professor Rowan and his assistant. Professor Rowan offers a different role than those who've taken his position in the past. First coming off of Sword and Shield, it was refreshing to find a professor whose goal is based on his love for Pokemon. He has grown too old to continue his research and has tasked his assistant, Barry, and yourself to complete his mission for him. Through the story, Rowan will show up and discuss the mysteries of Pokemon and what Team Galactic is doing. The mysteries grow deeper as you will encounter a black-cladding blonde woman who I most certainly wasn't attracted to as a young boy. This, of course, is the champion of the Pokemon League, Cynthia. She will provide some text that gives you an idea of what Team Galactic is doing, as well as some items you need to move the plot along. This culminates when she asks you to deliver an item to her grandmother, where you will learn about the Guardians of the Lake, and Cyrus will appear to explain more about his goals. Cyrus himself is a bit of an enigma throughout the game, showing up from time to deliver a monologue about how the world has become diluted and needs a major overhaul. Team Galactic is an actual terrorist organization whose goals stretch beyond raising the seas or making a quick buck. Cyrus's idea of reform is the destruction of the world itself. At least he's not a liberal. See himself as some kind of a god, but in Diamond and Pearl, it's not shown how that power is exerted over his grunts. This is minted in platinum, but we will go further into that later. The world you are defending from Cyrus is one of the most interesting to date as well. Rather than just finding your way through towns and fields with some beaches and driftwood mixed in like previous games, the DS allowed for a much more dynamic world with snow-covered mountains, fog-veiled valleys, and boggy marshlands. Growing up in Southern California, this felt much more realistic than the one-note regional layouts of Kanjoto and Hoenn semi-climates with a desert that certainly wasn't there just to show off weather mechanics. One thing I would be remiss to not mention is the fantastic soundtrack. I have a list of my favorite songs from a Pokemon game, and while National Park theme from Crystal version is number 1, 4 through 5 are from this generation. The lake theme is so good I had to resist using it too much in this video. The bike theme captures the feeling of exploring the massive world you've been put into, and Cynthia's theme brings out the tension of one of the best boss battles in the series. The feelings I had towards this generation of Pokemon are what I hope to recapture. Going in, I didn't know if that was possible or not. Though I have lots of good memories running around Sinnoh, I also remembered some issues that I'd hoped would be fixed if I was truly going to get everything I wanted out of the experience. The first main thing I would like to talk about is the story itself, and more specifically the pacing of that story. For this review, I went through Pokemon Brilliant Diamond. At the time of writing this, I had played through the entire game twice and put around 120 hours into the game total. Realistically, if I played this game simply to go through it, ignoring side contact and bullying my way through the game, this would be around a 20 to 25 hour casual playthrough. This brings me to the first thing I would like to cover. The pacing was absolutely a problem in Diamond and Pearl, and while Platinum fixed this a good bit, these are not remakes of Platinum. The game starts as any Pokemon game. Get your starter, do some tutorials, and get a gym badge. A few trainer battles and rival battles are thrown in for good measure, of course. Learn how to use the first HM, go through a forest, and then move on to the second badge. In most other Pokemon games, here you would do your first real-sized dungeon and move on to the third badge. Not the case in Sinnoh. You are going to go through the aforementioned dungeon, make your way down Cycling Road, meet the main boss of the evil team, work your way up to the Pokemon Tower, our third dungeon, take a little detour through some ruins, and finally go across another route to the town with a third gym. In this time you will be introduced to the underground, Poffin making, the Pokemon Nursery, ball seals, and Pokemon contests. So assuming you spend an hour or half messing around with each of these mechanics, you will go somewhere between 6 and 8 hours between badges 2 and 3. This is if you don't take the detour to Wayward Cave, easily adding another 40 minutes to your time. To put this in perspective, you will go through 5 routes, 3 towns or cities, and up to 4 dungeons on your way to badge 3. From there you'll go through 2 routes in a town with 1 useful building to badge 4, 1 new town and a route before going back to a previous town for badge 5, take one of the shortest routes in any Pokemon game to badge 6, Team Galactic sets off a bomb and we are tasked with visiting the 2 lakes you've already been to, and then you will actually take a decent hike up a couple of the worst routes in a Pokemon game to get badge 7 and visit the 3rd lake. We head back to Veilstone City to do a long 2-part dungeon and then move on to the final dungeon of the game. Mount Coronet, the mountain range that goes through the entire middle of the region, is our next destination. We go through a gauntlet of grunts that you will likely be over-leveled for before making it to the peak. You'll get a sweet animation as Cyrus says some evil stuff and either Dialga or Palkia are summoned. Fight the commanders in a double battle with Barry and then one-on-one with Cyrus. Capture your box legendary and then we go to the 8th gym. Once again we go across a single route, go to a lighthouse, get a gym badge, and for some reason Jasmine from Johto is here. We go up 1 route through Victory Road to get to the Elite Four. Now based on the way this script is, you wouldn't think I know much about structure, but I do know a few things. Let's imagine this is a 3-act story. In an RPG Act 1, by the end, you should meet your main players of the story, gain a bit of power, and learn the main story conflict. So let's say this happens when you meet Cyrus in the first cavern of Mount Coronet you will cross. At a faster pace, this will happen around the 4-hour mark or so. This is being generous, as it might be more appropriate to say the end of the first dungeon is the end of Act 1, but by the end of Act 2 in an RPG, you are going to be reaching the peak of tension of the main conflict. This would be when we arrive at the peak of Mount Coronet. That is going to be around the 20-hour mark. This can work in a story where the tension is ramping up, but there is a difference between a slow burn and just being slow. Looking back at our timeline, there's almost no additional conflict until we get our 6th badge. This would be approximately around the 15-hour mark. So between the start of Act 2 and the beginning of our Rising action, we have exactly 1 encounter with Team Galactic. This leaves you with around 10 hours or so where the conflict of the story does just about nothing, and the next 3 hours will be nothing but that. Story-wise, this gives you a bloated Act 2 where all the tension is in the final quarter. The third act is nice and short as it should be, but that second act can be a wearing task. This disappointment is exacerbated by the fact that Team Galactic is almost certainly the most interesting and successful evil team in any Pokemon game. An energy company trying to find the best way to create a power capable of restarting not just the world, but the entire universe. They take over Valley Windworks because it can be used to generate more power. The Eterna building is being used to research the secrets of form manipulation. At their main HQ, a much more nefarious plan, to capture the Guardians of the Lake and use them to channel and contain the power they will use to destroy everything. Even when you defeat their leaders, you don't stop their plan. You only win because the Guardians are overtaken by seeing the bond you have with your Pokemon. It's a great story, and especially so for a Pokemon game, yet we only spent a few hours with this story. The story in these short and distant snaps can be rather hard to grasp at times. You'll find yourself going, oh right, that's what they were doing, because you were distracted by marching across the entire game world to find the third gym leader. It is also very likely you'll spend a good bit of time distracted by other things. You find out the Baneri you caught in Eterna Forest likes dry food. What does that mean? You get to Hearthome later and find out about making Poffins. Well, you better spend some hours testing berry combinations and learning the Poffin making minigame and try to win the Master Contest. Ball capsules affect this too, so you should talk to every single NPC and do some random side quests to get the right combination of stickers. Even before you get your second badge, you could discover the underground. In this game, it has been upgraded a lot, which I will cover more later on, but let's say you find out about statues and the Diglett quest. Well, you better pour a few hours into that. The feature is great. Even in a playthrough I did purely for footage, I spent 3 hours there just because it's fun. Again though, this is an easy way to get pulled out of the story. I mentioned earlier that Platinum mended the sum, adding another commander, a few more battles, and even an entire realm to venture through. Later, the team even trails into the post-game. Now this all adds maybe an hour to the story, but when you consider that's 10% of your entire playthrough, that is a huge difference. A common defense which I feel has already been overplayed both ironically and not is that these remakes are supposed to be faithful, though I can't think of another Pokemon remake that took this avenue. Red and Blue didn't have the Sevi Islands, Gold and Crystal most certainly didn't have the Pokeathlon, Ruby and Sapphire didn't have Megas, so why this reminiscing for a faithful adaptation? I was happy they stuck with the similar regional decks, but even there, the Platinum regional decks is better without any doubt. Sword and Shield created one of the most interesting version differences in any game to me with different gym leaders. I didn't see anything but praise for this despite it not being the least bit faithful to the traditional Pokemon formula. It's worth mentioning that every time I write the word faithful, I'm putting it in quotes. I think a lot of the issues that are being defended as faithful are actually in defense of laziness, whereas the actual faithful pieces that are enjoyable don't require such a defense. Now, is this a scathing remark? No, there are very few places that this is a detriment to the game. The ongoing discourse is nonetheless frustrating as it leans into the consistent lack of demand for better content in new Pokemon games, and often overwhelms the legitimate praise that can be given to new games. I would like to say as a fan of Pokemon that I love the idea that Game Freak is going to start focusing on big projects like Pokemon Arceus, but that is lost if we're going to have developers like ILCA act the same way Game Freak would have towards smaller releases. I'm sure that Pokemon Let's Go Johto is somewhere in the pipeline, and if Brilliant Diamond's the rubric for our expectations, then I can only see this being the same as the Kanto versions with Johto tacked on at the end. With all that said, there were a few shining spots in the remake as well. The first obvious thing is Generation 8 battle mechanics. While there is no Dynamaxing, the improvements on abilities and movesets have been retained. Another change you'll notice pretty early on is the movement changes in the player character. The D-pad can be used for traditional walking on tiles. Early in the game you'll get your running shoes, and this opens up running with the joystick. With this, you can move diagonally, and I enjoyed this upgrade. It is worth noting though that your character doesn't seem to be casually jogging, but in a dead sprint. This is nice because Sinnoh is a large region that will have you running back and forth a bit, but early in the game the speed can be rather jarring. My personal favorite quality of life improvement from Gen 8 returns in the form of Pokebox. Having the ability to switch Pokemon out from your box without going back to a Pokemon Center is something that I hope the series continues. One undeniable change for the better is the adjustments to HMs and TMs. I've always preferred single-use TMs. The TR system in Sword and Shield was a proof of concept for me that this is the better system for certain moves. This certainly could have been executed better as you do have access to most of the strongest TMs in the game fairly early on, but when you know you have exactly one use of Earthquake, for example, it adds to your team building considerations. In the single player mode, that is what Pokemon is all about. HMs have also been changed for the better. Every Pokemon can only know 4 moves, and in the original Gen 4 games there were 8 HMs used to traverse Sinnoh. This means that in a playthrough where you used all 8, you would either have a team member you use purely for traversal, or you would have 1/3 of your team's moves taken up by these HMs. A few of these moves are still useful in battle, specifically Surf, Waterfall, and Strength. Brilliant Diamond made the great decision to simply make HMs something you access from your Pokédex to summon a wild Pokemon to help you while still giving you the moves as TMs so you can use them in the battle if you are so inclined. You will at many points in time find yourself considering your moves as main boss battles have been buffed. Several have competitive movesets, natures, IVs, and EVs. This can add a good bit of challenge to some of these fights. I've run into problems as early as the 3rd gym, and the Elite Four can have you praying to RNGesus at times. In terms of mainline Pokemon games, this is likely the one with the most challenge in battles. This edition is one of the best. Gen 4 was already a game that instilled a sense you needed to build a well-rounded team with a physical special split alone, but adding these challenges will have you thinking about your team composition to a higher extent. The side activities have improved a great deal as well. The Grand Underground is a new form of itself. Somehow, Pokemon got a cave update before Minecraft. While the Underground was already a fantastic place to spend time in the original games, its new mechanics have brought it up to a new level. The first thing to mention is the caverns. Pokemon now appear in the Underground, including some that are either difficult or impossible to get otherwise. The 3 most notable are Swablu, Houndoom, and Munchlax. This gives you access to a Dragon type, an additional Fire type to bring us up to a total of 3, and a Pokemon that is near impossible to obtain in the overworld. This feature ties into the 2 other major updates in the Diglett minigame and statues. As you run around the Underground, you occasionally see a Diglett or Dugtrio sticking out of the ground. It will leave behind a Glimmer you can grab. Gathering 40 of these will activate the Light Stone. This has 2 effects. First, it increases the chance of finding a shiny Pokemon in caverns by 3 times. And second, it will increase the chances of finding shiny statues in dig spots. Statues will affect the Pokemon that appear in caverns, and shiny statues increase this to a greater extent. There are better breakdowns of how this works, but with hundreds of different statues, the Grand Underground will easily take hours off your life before you notice how quick they've all gone by. All of these features are improved with online play. The other major minigame that has been improved is contests. In Gen 4, these were a bit monotonous with a heavy amount of RNG reliance. These have been transformed into a rhythm game, which is great fun. Now, I have never been much of a contest guy myself, but I know that I will eventually get around to attaching a few master ribbons to my favorite Pokemon later in my playtime, with the mechanics being something interesting rather than the waiting game they used to be. All in all, there is no doubt that these games are an overall improvement on Diamond and Pearl. These new additions all add a lot to the single player aspect of the game, and there's lots I'm yet to explore. These games though are certainly not without their flaws. Three things weigh down the gameplay. The most minor of these is the early access to some ridiculously powerful Pokemon. With only 1 badge, you'll make your way to Floraroma Town and find a very kind old couple who will give you legendary Pokemon depending on what previous Pokemon games you have save files for. Mew for Let's Go and Jirachi for Sword and Shield. On top of this, if you're playing before February 2022, you can also get Manaphy. I mentioned earlier that you didn't have to do a quest for Manaphy, but it was an in-person event for the original games. Instead, here you can have Mew, Jirachi, and Manaphy before even getting the second badge. You can simply box these Pokemon so it's minor, but I can't shake the feeling that the game that is so well balanced is willing to give you a ridiculously powerful Pokemon with no kind of gate or challenge requirement. Next is the Gen 8 XP share returning. Similar to others, I wonder why there's no option to turn this off. The fast pace of Gyms 3 through 5 is hurt by this the most. If you simply do the majority of trainer battles along the way, you will likely find yourself over-leveled by a bit, and this spirals into you being significantly stronger than any trainer you'll face before you get to the Pokemon League. The biggest problem for me was the reintroduction of the affection system. Friendship is a base stat that is raised with a few in-game events, battling, and the likes. This stat is required to improve certain moves and evolve 11 different Pokemon in the National Dex. Unfortunately, a lot of the same things you do that improve friendship also affect affection. Affection works as an overall buff that can make your Pokemon downright unfair. A Pokemon with maximum affection will gain experience at a higher rate, occasionally live through KOs with 1 HP, have an ability to dodge moves that have 100% accuracy, have a 20% chance of shaking off status conditions, and finally, they have double the chance to land critical hits. This can greatly discount your battling experience. For my second playthrough, I picked Turtwig as my starter and got one with a plus attack nature. Later on, Turtwig learned Curse, so I decided that I would run a classic setup of Curse, Leech Seed, Razor Leaf, and Earthquake. Razor Leaf is a good choice for the setup due to having a boosted critical hit chance and being a move learned fairly early on. The problem comes in the late game where I feel like every time I clicked it there was a critical. Once a Pokemon reaches max affection, there will be flavor text for every time you land a critical hit. So I often found myself wondering if I was landing these criticals because I had chosen a smart moveset, or if I was simply being bailed out by affection. Between the gift Pokemon, experience share, and the affection mechanic, the game can be a little bit watered down. Now, does that make the game unplayable? No. Occasionally frustrating though? Absolutely. When the first gameplay trailer came out for the new games, everyone noticed the new art style. Now, just for the sake of being thorough, let me say that I wasn't against this because I thought of it as a new take on the original style, faithful, even one might say. With a longer exposure time though, it comes off as a bit uncanny. It seems like they only half committed to this style. When someone says chibi, it invokes a certain image in my mind, and the game just doesn't quite hit that. The game uses a mix of full-scale models and chibi models, and a lot of the chibi models looked like they started with the eyes and hairs, but then just decided to scale down the mouth and nose based on the full-scale models. It is worth mentioning the land of Sinnoh itself is gorgeous. I was afraid that a lot of this world would end up coming up stale, but it's obvious the developers at ILCA put a lot of care into making this world feel alive. The slight breeze on certain routes moves the trees. The battle backgrounds are constantly changing, and I haven't seen one that made me feel the tiny bit of disgust I did in the last two Pokemon releases. The little animation of you running through and kicking up grass brought more dynamicism to the world than Game Freak has in generations. Sadly, there wasn't much improvement on the main attraction, the Pokemon themselves. The 3D models for Pokemon still don't quite hit right. For me, the sprites always do a better job showing the unique personality of every Pokemon, and the 3D models can just come out a bit flat. Craniados was a Pokemon I never used in Gen 4 before, and I spent a couple hours in the underground searching out a skull fossil for my second playthrough. Yet, when I sent out my ancient monster, it often felt like I was sending out this clay figurine. A lot of the models don't have much articulation where it would be appropriate. This doesn't take you completely out of the game, but every now and again it does pop out. This is somewhere that can be improved, but I expect that will happen over many years and likely only in Game Freak developed games. I doubt that ILCA had much say in exactly what the Pokemon needed to look like for this game. I mentioned in a Twitch stream that I was hoping the new releases would stick to the Platinum Pokédex and not try to jam in all the newer Pokemon since. This came halfway true, and we'll talk a little more about that later. The reason I was hoping for that though was I wanted to meet all the same Pokemon with the newest battle mechanics added in. I wanted to meet all my old friends and beat Barry into the ground again. I wanted to see the expansive world of Sinnoh in a higher fidelity. Did I get all of that? More or less. Was this the nostalgia trip I was expecting? I honestly don't think so. Nostalgia itself is more of a longing for a feeling than a sentiment towards that feeling. I can never be that 7-year-old kid again with nothing to do but go to school a few hours a day and play Pokemon way too late every night. I'm an adult now with bills and a job. Even during my initial playthroughs, I had to move from my home because of an expiring lease. The nostalgic feelings are there, but playing through, there is one thing that was deeply apparent in many of the issues I had. These games should have been remakes of Pokemon Platinum. It was the better game. New battle mechanics and expanded mini-games are lots of fun, but they don't make up for the lack of improvement in the main plot and the troublesome mechanics added in. In the many hours I spent playing the game and then staring at this screen trying to organize my thoughts into something coherent, I reflected on a few things. One thing I couldn't forget is that the Pokemon series is still a game primarily designed for the enjoyment of children. Is a small kid going to spend much time thinking about how off the chibi art style looks? More than likely not. Their excitement will lie in discovering a new Pokemon world, but mine needs to come from revisiting it. Though there was this number that kept coming into my head, $60. $60 is the cost of this game. I asked myself, was it worth it? For me, I typically say that any game should be charging you something around $1 per enjoyable playtime. Did I get that out of these games? Without a doubt. I wonder if that would be possible for someone who didn't enjoy the Gen 4 games. What if I couldn't care less about contests and the underground? That's dozens of potential hours that are lost instantly. I also consider how differently I play through these games now. In my main playthrough, I spent 2 hours trying to find a Shinx with a nature I wanted, something my 7-year-old self would never have done. I spent 30 hours soft resetting for Dialga, which I wouldn't have done just 2 years ago, as shiny hunting is a new interest for me. I know these games didn't change a whole lot, but I most certainly did. My final thoughts come down to this. I'm sure there will be lots of ragging on these games, but these are good Pokemon games. Some issues are difficult to overlook at times, but that is true of any long-running series. I do think that if I were to buy this game for my hypothetical child, it would be a fantastic introduction to Pokemon. In my opinion, this would be the best option for a game in the mainline series. Though as a longtime fan, they are a bit lackluster. There's obvious cleaning that should have been done in the game, and as of the time I write this script, many online features are still unavailable. I have yet to mention a lot of the exploitable glitches that have been discovered, again showing that lack of polish. In this case, I would say the $60 price point is not worth it. If you weren't particularly excited about these remakes, I would say hold out for the online features to come out, or price drop to $40 if for some reason Nintendo allows for a price drop to happen. I came up with the title of this video somewhere around the halfway through the script. This was my third draft, as it was difficult for me to decide what the ultimate direction for this video would be. While my original intent was to highlight the positives and do some slight comparisons to the 2006 releases, that isn't what it came out to be. In reality, I think what I discovered is that what has changed the most between the remakes and the originals is myself. New tricks are always good fun, but this old dog wasn't impressed. Wow, so somehow you're still here. Let me just say thank you so much. I'm guessing this thing is going to be something around like half an hour, maybe longer, so sticking around this long is amazing. If you like this video, I do have more planned. Won't be doing anything else Pokemon until Arceus comes out, but that will absolutely get a similar video, if not something longer. I already have a couple of ideas that I'm playing around with, might not be quite as long, but this format is my favorite thing to watch on YouTube, and so that's mostly what I'll be making. I will plug that I stream on Twitch from time to time. My recent move has brought some challenges to that, so I don't know when that will be consistent again, but feel free to follow me at twitch.tv/jcritz. I'll make sure to put that link in the description. Again, thank you so much for sticking around this time. I hope you have a great day, and I look forward to seeing you again in the future.